Thank you, folks. You're all very brave and persistent for joining me at 8:30 in the morning, the last day of a conference after the very long week that we've all had. Hopefully everyone has had as good of a time as I have catching up and getting to see what everyone is up to in the industry. I'm going to be talking to you about building the plane while flying, or how do we try to bootstrap new identity talent. My name is Erin Crow. I'm the Senior Manager of our user authentication products at AWS. But more than that, I think there are some other reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this today. First of all, I've been there and I've done that. I actually grew up through the call center at Amazon about 10 years ago. So my own background doesn't contain any formal training in computer science or in identity security. Everything that I have learned has been on the job. But then also, I have been a hiring manager in recent years, including through some of the very crazy tech talent boom that happened over the pandemic when it became very competitive for labor. And I am hoping that some of you here in the audience today are hiring managers who will get to take some of these learnings back to your teams. But if not, part of the reason that became so interesting is because of some of these numbers here. Now, a quick preface for this is that this was not conducted very scientifically on my part, I admit. I collected these figures through looking through a number of different surveys, postings that were available on LinkedIn, so on and so forth. But part of the reason that hiring is such a struggle in IAM, and you might hear people talk a lot about it at different sessions this week, is that I figure that we have about 3 to 5 million cybersecurity positions globally. However you define that, the categories can be a little bit loose. Of those, probably only 250 to 300,000 are identity professionals. And then at the same time, we have 40 to 60,000 open roles today if you go through Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn. That number itself should look a little bit weird, right? That is almost a critical mass or a quorum of all the identity professionals that we have. On top of that, we should expect 12 to 15% continued growth in cybersecurity year over year for the next several years as we continue to go through this digital transition. So it's tough if you are looking for someone that is already extremely tenured that you can bring in and just be ready to go off the bat. Thanks to the folks from ID Pro for letting me take the most recent 2023 skills survey at a preview so I could include the most up-to-date version of this slide. That skills survey is very interesting, but this particular graph is one that always really stands out to me. It's about how long did it really take you to feel proficient as an identity practitioner. I should have included, but I didn't have here, the makeup of the people that take this skills survey. It does lean a little bit more towards more tenured folks, not folks who are just brand new, like first couple months in the role, which makes that bottom right piece really, really interesting. 28% of people say, I still don't feel proficient. And then right above that, you can see that even after 3 to 5 years, which I think I can still say is the bucket that I fall into, maybe it's a little bit more than that, don't feel proficient after even that point in time. So proficiency is really a long game in identity. Even if you do bring someone on board, we have the challenge of how do you get them feeling effective and confident really quickly. This doesn't have to be a painful undertaking, by the way, I want to underscore. I think it's actually really, really a good thing that we find more ways to pull in new people into the industry, not just because we have to, but because it benefits us and it helps us grow as professionals as well to help others learn. And it doesn't have to be painful to do so. I thoroughly believe, after the last several years, that some skills in rockstar product managers, SAs, and other types of job families can be a lot harder to train to people than gaining identity knowledge and teaching them to use that knowledge effectively. Critical thinking, being able to have creative problem solving, communicating effectively at all different levels, including your C-suite, those are all things that take a lot of time and a bit of talent to develop. So, thinking about how we can tackle that other piece when we bring in people that maybe have those other great base business skill sets, I've observed 3 really common obstacles in my own learning and in people that we've brought on that I'll share a little bit about and how I think we could approach that with some tactics. The first is that there's just so much information that you have to understand and absorb, and getting to know what you don't know is a major problem. When I first started trying to pick up a number of different concepts, and I would be like, I'm confused, I don't even know what to ask about, inevitably people would say with good intentions, just Google it. And that's not helpful because I didn't even know what I needed to Google in order to find information that was both relevant, accurate, and I could actually make sense of, because it didn't require so much other context to understand before I could understand what I was reading. And because there are so many different sources of information, we also have a range of quality in that information. I find that very little of the sources that we look at today are truly authoritative. Doesn't mean that they're not quality, or they don't come with good recommendations, but there are a few places where we can say, this is how it is done definitively in identity. We have, of course, frameworks like NIST. Those are, of course, only prescriptive to a narrow set of use cases within DoD. We still look at them for guidance, but for reasons that I'll discuss later, those still really can't be the guiding light for a lot of people trying to understand what to do and what to recommend to their teams in this field. The other problem is that connections between these reference materials and the real life thing that you're going to encounter in your business can be tenuous at best. It's not always obvious when you go and read what is supposed to be a very nice, perfect reference architecture, or even that NIST framework. How do you connect that to what you're seeing in your business? Because businesses can and do customize, they do proprietary things to meet our individual business needs. So you may be looking across a field in your own environment that looks nothing like what you're told it should, although there may be very good reasons that it looks that way. The other thing is identity is a very broad field, and few concepts are very cleanly compartmentalized. So what I mean by that is really puzzles only make sense when you have the larger puzzle picture for a reference, or you finally get it all together. But in the meantime, it's very hard to make sense of, in this broad ecosystem, maybe what are the implications if I make a decision, say, in my MFA service. What am I bound to by things that happened elsewhere in the account onboarding process or in the just general account lifecycle management? Maybe you think, okay, after 6 months or so, I've learned everything that I need to learn about MFA. I know all the authenticators, the standards, usability, all of that. But you might not have much familiarity with account recovery, which means you also need to know what happened at account creation, what kind of attributes your team's collecting that might later be used as potentially a backdoor or as a facilitator to help someone recover their device. So to get effective early on means you have to have a pretty broad view, which is another challenging layer on top of it. The third one is that high order judgment is a very hard-won skill. This is one that has only become really apparent to me in the last couple of years. I think it's generally true for all industries. Developing what we at Amazon call the principle of like R right a lot, having good judgment, being able to use data effectively to make good decisions is hard, but I think that people feel like this is scarier in security because of the potential impacts that we deal with. I see this play out in usually one of two different ways as people are onboarding and learning. They either bias towards models of risk assessment that are frankly almost draconian, and they are too restrictive. They restrict your users in ways that maybe are very security or privacy preserving, but they are not effective tools for maintaining retention, engagement, and user experience. On the other side, if they don't fully understand some of the fundamental risks that they're working with, or if they bias too much for user experience, they may make decisions that are too permissive. So our industry is changing not only in terms of its technology, but as a profession and a vocation. There are a number of resources that are growing in number that we can reference to try to help us with this process. Of course, we have the ID Pro body of knowledge and its Slack channel, which is always very busy, the NIST frameworks that I mentioned, as well as you have so many different specifications, and all of that is usually freely available online that people can go take a look at. A number of vendor-specific blogs, podcasts, and books. Of course, you have to keep in mind as you're sending people to these, they are all colored by the perspectives of the individuals that wrote them and potentially their business objectives. It doesn't make this bad. It just means they really are going to need help contextualizing what they're reading to understand if this is what they should be taking away or not. Which is why I say, these are all good things to have, but they're not enough. And I want to be really clear when I say that, I am fully invested in ID Pro's work. I have authored articles in the body of knowledge. I helped write the CIDPro certification. It'd be super weird if I then got up here and told you that I don't think that's a good resource, so don't take that away from what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that by itself, having information is never going to be enough to solve our talent problem in identity. You need connective tissue through mentorship, through people in this room, through your hiring manager that can help you kind of order and navigate this information to become effective. Not just so that your people will become effective on the job faster, but to support their long-term career development as well. To that end, the way that I've started to look at this is you really need to onboard and plan beyond that very intentionally. If possible, you should be thinking 1 to 2 years ahead as you plan to hire someone that doesn't have prior identity background. It doesn't mean that you have to spoon feed them or turn over every rock, but you should have an idea. What are the concepts that they're going to be introduced to? What kind of stakeholders and what systems? Therefore, what gaps will they have at the end of their first year that you'll need to conquer as you move into the second year so that they can become, especially at senior levels, as autonomous and effective as early as they can. So another point of this is you need to expose them to breadth and risk very early as you're developing this onboarding plan. In so much as you can, the initial priority selection, I think, is extremely important. Often, I think, when people are new, we want to kind of like nudge them into new things gently. We don't want to throw them into the deep end of the pool right away. But I've come to consider that it's probably not the right way to go. For the reasons that I mentioned earlier, just getting to know how big this ecosystem is, the more effective thing, I think, is to expose people to projects early on that will have them crossing over multiple different systems within your ecosystem, multiple different types of stakeholders from your security folks, fraud, GRC, support even, so that they can get the bigger picture much earlier. Another part of this, which is, I think, really scary for a lot of us to try to give up some control for, is to find ways to expose them to the concept of risk evaluation really early, really early, within their first 3 months ideally. And that doesn't just mean the risk of, like, if I make this trade-off on this service delivery, on this feature delivery, my launch will be delayed. I'm talking about if your team has any involvement at all in incident response and those kinds of things, you need to give them guardrails. I'm not saying go ask them to take that risk and be accountable for it right away. That would be irresponsible. But you should expose them to the people that are really good at that in your organization. If you have summaries and write-ups, if you have like outbound communication to customers, get them involved in the process of helping the team summarize this and looking at and wordsmithing the wording so they can start to pick up what is it that makes these responses good and how do these people measure and assess risk. So as managers and as people, even not just managers, but anybody that's trying to help support the learning of others, I think that helping people with that information discovery and processing is an obligation that we have. One way that I've tackled this that people seem to receive well in our organization is to develop brain banks. So these are educational resources, or I hope they're educational resources that contain basically a knowledge dump, but in an ordered fashion, which hopefully makes sense in the order of operations that need to go and learn concepts. It means annotating things like, okay, here's the entire body of identity standards that are common that we can identify that you should probably know about, but here's the ones that we use in our ecosystem. Here is why we use those versus others if there are multiple options. And by the way, here's any kind of customization that we had to pile on top of it because of XYZ reason. Some other things that you can put in there, of course, are like any other regulatory statutes, lists of different conferences and learning materials that they can go to. These are all great things. Another thing that's really important is to have that connective tissue, you really need to have other humans on the other side of it that can help support their journey and their discovery. There's no point that's too early to establish a mentor. In Amazon, we established these from day one. Sometimes these partnerships fall off after a couple of weeks or months, but I try to find ways to help people have longer lasting connections than that, ones that at least extend into their first year. These connections can be really hard to develop organically for our remote workers too, I've observed. I'm a fan of remote work, but it's true that if you are new to a field, so you don't already have that big network, and then you're new to a company, and you're working in an environment where you don't have a lot of organic touch points, it can be really hard to just meet people. So you can do someone a great service by facilitating that connection within your own internal network. Because we don't all have abundant time, it's really important too to make sure that helping others helps the mentors as well. At Amazon, we have a principle, hire and develop the best, which means that everyone in the company is accountable for helping ensure the success of the other people in the company. I like this principle, but I don't think that you have to have it as an explicit measurement in order to put this into practice. If someone is helping your folks, other people that you want to help develop, make sure that you give feedback to their leadership chain so that they understand how valuable it was, not just to you or your person, but to your company, for them to spend that time. I know that I'm at AWS, so some of these things that I'm going to talk about, conferencing and maybe having like membership association status and things like that, are not always achievable at every scale or every budget. And then also, if you don't have enough tenured identity folks already to go and have rapid fire hiring and support available, scaling those helpers becomes mission critical, not just to help your new folks, but to prevent your tenured folks from burning out as well. There are some things that we can do to help scale limited resources in identity. To pick on Dean Sachs, one of my coworkers and friends, Dean set up these workshops within AWS for people that wanted to go take the CID Pro examination, or even if they didn't, where he took, I think, 8 to 12 weeks, 11 weeks, where multiple hours a week, he would sit through and go through and guide people among the different body of knowledge articles in an order that made sense, help contextualize it for them in terms of the larger industry, as well as helping them contextualize it in what does this mean at AWS and how we practice identity. And we've had very good feedback for that, even from folks who did not ultimately take the CID Pro examination. Beyond this, record everything. If you have folks putting in this time, you can't necessarily ask them to do that every time you have a new hiring cycle. So recording and making it as scalable as possible is key. The external network is also really important. I think that folks that are here this week can probably pick up on that. The connections that you're able to make are great. There are ways that you can help facilitate getting that foot in the door as well. You can send them to conferences, like Identiverse. I know that that is an expense, but it kind of becomes a question at that point of where do you want to pay the tax? Do you want to spend more time helping someone get to proficiency, which is harder to quantify, but still a financial cost? Or do you want to spend a little bit more on their learning in order to get them there? It's not always feasible, but it is something to consider as you're evaluating your budget for sending folks to trainings. The standards bodies also have various meetups. There are also like more resources also in the general security community that can be useful, B-sides, things like that are fairly low cost. You also have nearly free double whammy mechanisms. Like I mentioned the ID Pro Slack, that is very active. People will just tag everyone in if they have an expert and they have a problem that needs matched up. Another thing that I was very skeptical of when I first started, I'm not a social media person. I don't like it. I'm very hard to get a hold of. I apologize for those of you that know that firsthand. But everyone told me you need to be on Twitter. InfoSec is on Twitter. That is where people go and they socialize, they network, and a lot of people will share different things that they're working on and resources. You can help them by curating lists of these people, if they don't already know who they are and where they are, that they can go follow and start engaging with. I included a couple clips here of some of the folks that I follow that I find this has helped in practice. Rachel Toback, of course, who spoke about social engineering at the keynote in Identiverse last year. And there was also Leslie Carhart, who is both a great professional and fun just on Twitter to watch in general. And then Aaron Precki, who you may have seen wandering around Identiverse this week, giving his talk about OAuth. He also frequently posts updates about his webinars and other work going on there as well. So just to kind of recap, there's going to be some common obstacles. The sheer volume of information that people need to get through. How do you contextualize this in the bigger picture? And then how do you actually apply those learnings and internalize them in a way that allows you to act on the information that you have effectively, make decisions, help your business move forward, define features, whatever your objective might actually be. You can help these folks through a variety of tactics, from curating their learning materials, creating annotated study guides, et cetera. And it's upfront work, but it provides a lot of value, I've found, in the long run. And then finally, it's extremely important to remember that the human element is really critical. We can't be hands-off in this process of helping people, otherwise it's extraordinarily overwhelming and frustrating to try to get a foothold on this industry. Frankly, there's just so much going on. But if you can help them establish those internal as well as their external networks early, they're going to be more effective, they're going to learn better, and hopefully, like some of us in here feel, they might end up seeing identity as their vocation and not just their job. So just on that note really quickly, I thank you for coming to listen to me today. I feel like we all have a responsibility to help build this bench. I hope that we will start taking more chances on people that maybe don't come from conventional backgrounds. I wouldn't be talking to you today if many people hadn't done that for me. And I think we have a couple minutes if we'd like to do some questions. Thank you. Yes, shout out to support as always. Danny also supported our operations orgs. Any questions? You and then, go ahead.
You had a lot of great content. I was curious if you had some thoughts about hooking up with educational institutions or other training centers to be able to pull and mentor leadership.
Yes, so actually yesterday, Lance, right there, actually talked about the first college course that he ran at his institution that tried to take some of this into practice in a college course. And I think it would be great to probably also talk to Lance about this afterwards. But in general, I've observed there are a lot of people that are very motivated and passionate about how do we put more of this into practice. There are a couple other folks that I know that have tried to talk about how do we get this into institutions. I don't know if we've maybe taken a super formal approach at like how do we want to do that, but it's probably worth it to start talking in that kind of context. I think we've reached a mass, and our industry continues to grow as such. We have a lot of materials now to help educate people. It's how do we help them get it into their brains effectively? Thank you. Pam?
New employees get very overwhelmed, and there's so much going on. You have so many mandatory meetings. Is there a way to help people prioritize, or have you found a way to sort of help them differentiate why this education is important?
That's a really great question. So the thing that I try to encourage people when they're first onboarding is oftentimes, especially if you're coming into a field where you don't already have a lot of background, I think people feel really the spotlight is on them, like they need to prove themselves. So I try very hard to understand and to make them understand and tell them like, hey, your first month, I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to take any action items. I don't want you to write any paper, not do anything, right? But I don't want you to take any big core deliverables or feel like you need to go into a meeting and tell people like X, Y, Z. I want you to take the first couple of months to just genuinely sit, learn, observe, talk to other people. It's also on us as managers, I think, as they start to move out of that period when they do actually need to start, taking on and making some judgments about where they spend their time. Varying, of course, whether you're talking about relatively like more junior staff versus more senior staff. More senior staff will be expected to be more autonomous usually. But we also have a responsibility to keep in mind what is the workload like of the people that we're working with. And I think that becomes easy to miss in our own day-to-day jobs. So having a conversation with them regularly about what are you learning, what are you worried about, and what can I help you with? Like what is on your plate that has a conflict or you're just not sure about? Those open conversations are pretty helpful. Anybody else? Oh, in the back.
How are you managing the risk of training jumps in areas? So you train them up for a year and they jump to another company and you have to do the cycle again and again and again.
Yeah, it is a risk for sure, and that can be frustrating, right, if you have limited resources of your own and then you have to go try to backfill positions. But I have two thoughts on that. For one, I think that building a really good working culture and having a good team culture that makes them want to stay, even after they got that information and that education, is so, so important. The best years that I've had out of the 10 that I've been at Amazon have been in teams that were like that and managers that were like that. It motivated me to stay around for a very long time. But then the other thing is, it hurts us sometimes as a business when we feel like we're shorthanded, but it's not inherently a bad thing. If someone takes that knowledge and then they go off and they have another good adventure, I've told the people on my team that many times. I want you to be here. I value you being here. But if you believe that you have an opportunity that's better for you, I'm going to be super happy for you. And I'm not going to do something to, try to take away that joy. So I think that taking that mentality that we are working as an industry together, and that having more professionals that are tenured and capable is good for all of us, helps balance that feeling for me a little bit at least. All right, I don't see any other hands. Well, thank you folks again. I know it's a very early morning. Safe travels home and enjoy the rest of your day.